Robert Anton Wilson was, an American novelist, satirist, nonfiction writer as well. He's the author of over 35 books. His career lasted, just over 40 years. He's been described, and I like this description, as sort of a cornerstone of the 1960s American counterculture. I would extend that into UK and European counterculture as well.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. In today's episode, I sit down with Gabriel Kennedy to discuss his new book, Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. We explore Wilson's life, influences, and enduring ideas, with a particular focus on his concept of Chapel Perilous, an initiatory state of uncertainty where perception is destabilized and transformation is possible. Our conversation takes us through Wilson's time in Ireland, his engagement with esoteric and mystical traditions, and the deep imprint of Irish history and culture on his work. We also examine the broader themes of language law, intergenerational trauma, and how these forces shape identity and collective memory. Gabriel shares the extensive research that went into writing his book, including interviews with nearly 75 people, and how Wilson's ideas remain relevant in today's world of uncertainty and paradigm shifts. In the Plus show, we go even deeper into Robert Anton Wilson's time in Ireland and the profound themes he explored in his book, The Widow's Son. Through the novel's protagonist, Wilson examines intergenerational trauma and its place in Irish identity, the lingering scars of colonial history, in particular the Great Famine. And these are ideas that remain deeply relevant today. We also explore the lasting impact of language loss in Ireland, tracing its roots to the famine and beyond, and to the cultural suppression that followed the famine. Drawing on the play translations by Brian Friel, we discuss how language shapes perception and identity, and how the current Irish language revival is an act of cultural reclamation, and I would say generational healing too. And this ties into a broader conversation again about intergenerational trauma, but also the epigenetic effects of famine, war, stress, and that and how that can stay in a people centuries after, in very physical ways. So it's a fun conversation, and we weave together mysticism, history, and a deep cultural memory, all against the rich tapestry of this fabulous work on Robert Anton Wilson. Now, I would add, Grant Morrison does pop up briefly and loudly, so don't have your headphones up to the max. Also, there's pretty good show notes with this one, so do check that out below if you want to pick up Gabriel's book or any of Raw's books that we discuss, or indeed even things like translations by Brian Friel. You can find the links to all those in the show notes below. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, simple thing to do is visit the link tree below and come and join the Patreon. You get every single Plus show that's ever been made, and an absolute raft of bonus content, loads and loads of stuff, as well as a whole other podcast called Nameless, with myself and Tommy Kelly. So, and all that pretty much for $5, which is pretty. I haven't changed my prices in years, so it's pretty good value. And if that doesn't whet the appetite, if you want to support me, you can always pick up a copy of my book, Song of the Dark Man. It's always greatly appreciated. Okay, let's get on with the show. All right. So, Gabriel Kennedy, you are most welcome to the Spirit Box.
Thank you for having me here, Dara. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I've just finished reading your book on Robert Anton Wilson. Fabulous work. Very, very well researched on a hugely popular figure, legendary figure in, I guess we would say, our kind of esoteric trickster circles. Could you introduce yourself and your work, and give the audience a kind of a flavor of what we're going to talk about today?
Sure, yeah. First, again, thank you for having me here, Dara. And my name is Gabriel Kennedy, aka Prop Anon. I'm a multimedia artist, concentrating on the written world, the written world, the written word, film, acting, music. This is my first book. I'm primarily a writer, though, right? So I've been writing for most of my life, but really just concentrated everything for this one particular book, put all my energies into it. I was born and raised in New York, just outside, 23 miles away from Brooklyn. My parents were from Ireland. I was raised in a bar. They were bar owners. So I was always around very colorful stories and very colorful language, jokes, things like that. Yeah, I've toured as a hip hop artist for many years. I was doing that primarily before I, wrote this book. Yeah, the Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, is something I'm very proud of.
Oh, and rightly so. I mean, it's a fabulous, really, really well written and incredibly well researched, incredibly detailed book. And you paint a fabulous picture of his life. Is that the Proclamation of Independence behind you?
The what?
Is that the Irish
Oh, behind me.
Proclamation?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
Right. On Fublock the Boo.
Uh,
Very good. Very good.
it was my dad's. Yeah,
Yeah. That's official merchandise from Ireland for sure. Like,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah, it's from I think around 1976. That particular one. Yeah,
Right. Okay. Cool.
50
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to get into Ireland later in the show. So I'll try and stay on point. So tell us a little about what kind of what inspired you to take on this undertaking to write this book.
Well, yeah, it was pure inspiration and an extremely organic sort of process. Robert Anton Wilson, I discovered him when I was about 18 in high school. I read Illuminatus trilogy over the summer between, high school and college. And that book just became, I wouldn't say at the time was my favorite book, but very quickly, it blew my mind and Wilson, became a fascination for me. Like, so I, became a fan of his work over the next number of years. I read absolutely everything I could get my hands on, like a number of sort of, really diehard Wilson fans. He really was able to, I wouldn't even say cultivate, but like a huge cult following emerged around this writer. And I found his life fascinating. Excuse me. I found his life fascinating. And I just wanted to learn more about, the life that he lived. But that's, a major, that's fast forwarding. But before embarking on writing this book, as I said, like I learned everything I possibly could about what Wilson wrote. And that sort of culminated in the attending Wilson put together this thing called the Maybe Logic Academy. It was an online asynchronous sort of learning website that was online in 2004. Right. And the Maybe Logic Academy existed for about 10 years, but Wilson died in 2007. I was a major sort of participant in that kind of online school. It was great. Wilson recruited, it wasn't just him teaching classes, like a class would be based off of one of his books, but he recruited like other great writers, So Douglas Rushkoff taught classes, Starhawk, Patricia Monahan, Peter Carroll taught a bunch of chaos magic classes. Anturo Ali taught a bunch of classes. There was a long list of teachers, and eventually I taught a class there too at the end, which was really nice.
Epic.
Yeah, it was a really, kind of icing, like nice moment there. And yeah, so I then in 2003, I met Bob and I interviewed Wilson. Again, that was sort of like another thing of just, learning more about this writer that has, kind of influenced my thoughts so much. And that was kind of like the seed really for this book, this interview of Wilson way back in 2003. But of course, it took many, many years before, all the pieces sort of, placed together in my mind to really get hit with the realization that yes, I want to write a biography about this guy, because for many years I wanted to write a book about his ideas and critically analyzing his ideas, and kind of contrasting his ideas with more academic explanation of things, and where did the two overlap, and where are they so different. But the main point of writing the book, I suppose, was to get Wilson's name up on the wall. Even though he's well known, he's still not that well known.
Sure.
um Writers within his sort of milieu, people like Thomas Pynchon, William S. Burroughs, Kurt Vonnegut, Philip K. Dick, they're all more well known than he is, and I just wanted to get his name out there a little bit. And it was also sort of like the final lesson of working with, in a sense, my teachers lessons. You know what I mean? Like I just wanted to, as thoroughly as possible, go through his ideas and then his life, and see where he was thinking, where exactly was he when he had his holy guardian angel experience of July 23rd, 1973. He never really quite says that in his work, where he was physically on this earth. And I just wanted to find out. So, that's what I did. I found out exactly, I suppose, where he was, I think, when he had that experience, and put it in the book. And yeah, so this is all just sort of like a culmination of a long study of Wilson's work, and hopefully now I could share it with the world, and people could see, what fascinated me so much.
Right. Well, I mean, as I said at the top of the show, it's incredibly well researched. Like, it certainly comes across. You've got like some immense specific detail around his schooling, around his kind of early life illness, and kind of the influence that had in its work. And you pull those threads throughout the book, which is very you can see the kind of the impact on his ideas as that unfolds, and I think you paint that picture as well quite well. Also in the figures around him and kind of the ideas that he's been exposed to. And I suppose kind of one of the things about Wilson is that his works tend to blur the lines between fiction and reality. And like, did you find that was a struggle at all when you were kind of researching his life, like ambiguity, ambiguity, that kind of thing?
Maybe a little bit here and there, but I don't think it was really a little bit here and there. But and for example, perhaps some ambiguity around his maternal grandmother.
Right.
He had written in a book that this book, Cosmic Trigger Volume 2, that his maternal grandmother was from Ireland. But then he wrote in an article years earlier called "In My Own Way" that his maternal grandmother was from Trieste, where his maternal grandfather was from. So Wilson's father's, paternal grandparents were both from Ireland. But again, like I said, his maternal grandparents, some ambiguity in that. Yeah, this is like a picayune sort of little detail, but for when just the type of research that I was doing, I wanted to just pin down as much as I possibly could about this guy's life. And Wilson's nice in the sense, writing about Wilson's nice in the sense that he, his Cosmic Trigger series, volume 1, 2, and 3. That's sort of an autobiography there for, that was a great place to start. But I just built it all very objectively, right? So I had those 3 books, right? But then I just started with my interviewing process, and I interviewed nearly 75 people for this book. And then the interviews acted as sort of, concentric circles. So I got as close to the source as possible. And that was in interviewing Wilson's children, especially his daughter, Christina, who's kind of the executor of the Raw estate. And so I just grounded it all in journalism, really, to, pin down and work through and find out, and see what's true and what isn't, what ambiguities could I resolve? And I think I did. I resolved a number of things, but then other things too. And this is interesting about Bob, like contrasting um, Bob with his wife Arlen. You know, Bob's stock was he grew up poor in South Brooklyn during the Great Depression. There's I contacted his grammar school, his first primary school, and they had no photographs of any of the children from then. There was no records. And I asked why, and they said they're too poor. The school was too poor to even take pictures of kids.
Wow.
So it was very difficult to sort of find out the deep backstory of Wilson. Whereas with Arlen, his wife, she came from sort of like a old American stock. So her parents, uh, their wedding was announced in a local newspaper at the
Mhm.
time, and
Right.
Arlen grew up rich in Canada or Maine and upstate New York, and so that was interesting seeing that. So there's not as many ambiguities. It was easier to find Arlen's deep backstory as
Right.
opposed to Wilson's deep backstory. And in terms of him writing in his life, um, yes, there were definitely other instances where there was uh yeah his recollections are not quite what happened, and I have it in my book, Chapel Perilous. One is he sort of misremembers some things sometimes. So he was arrested for a civil rights protest that he took part in 1963, I believe, off the top of my
Right.
head. I have it here in my book, and he writes about this arrest in one of his books, but he gets the date wrong.
Yeah.
So a quick setup was he was part of a civil disobedience, civil rights protest in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and they were seeking to segregate or make this segregated barber follow the law to desegregate his shop. And cut the hair of black men, and he refused to. So the civil rights groups of Yellow Springs instituted like a years long civil rights campaign to get businesses in town to follow the law,
Right.
because in America laws are passed, but it doesn't matter unless they're enforced.
Gotcha.
And so Wilson's recollection of that, getting arrested, et cetera, he got the date wrong because there was a huge final demonstration in March of 1964, and the police came out, and fire hoses were taken out, and it was huge. Wilson writes about that as if he was at that protest in his book, but in reality, he took part in a protest in July of 1963. So these were the ambiguities that I was trying to
Right.
pin down,
Right.
and that took quite a while to really get that correctly,
Mhm.
right? To get that correct. Um, so yeah, I don't think though Wilson was purposely trying to throw people off
Yeah.
in his work. It was just a matter of getting the facts straight, and that's not that unusual
Oh
with.
God, no. Christ. Yeah. I mean, like it's my memory's terrible. I can only imagine, like, if you've got kind of a volume of all these incredible experiences, they just start to merge. It's just like it's human nature. Um, I'm conscious that we kind of got right into it without really explaining who kind of Raw is. Would you mind just giving like kind of like a brief overview? I mean, I'm conscious you've written quite a detailed book about his life, but can you give a very, very condensed version of for those who may not be familiar with him?
Sure thing. Yeah, Robert Anton Wilson was, an American novelist, satirist, nonfiction writer as well. He's the author of over 35 books. His career lasted, just over 40 years. He's been described, and I like this description, as sort of a cornerstone of the 1960s American counterculture. I would extend that into UK and European counterculture as well. Um, and he was friends with some of the luminaries of his time, people like George Carlin, Timothy Leary, and many others. He is the co-author of the infamous legendary book Illuminatus trilogy, along with Robert Shea, and he's one of the biggest influences on current culture that has not gotten his credit for being such an influence.
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting take there to kind of wrap up that, because one of the things that kind of comes up on this show a lot is, how did you end up in whatever kind of magical practice or whatever kind of like say slipstream practice or profession that one would end up on a kind of on a show like this, and quite frequently kind of like it tends to be usually kind of one of a few things, and Illuminatus is one of them. Is one of those kind of like springboards into thinking in a different way, to um, magical thinking that like the Invisibles. Grant Morrison is another, and Alan Moore would obviously be in the mix as well. But the Discord talk that Grant Morrison did.
When I was a kid, I read Robert Anton Wilson and all this shit. And here we are, we're standing here, we're talking about this shit, and it's real.
Certainly, that was one for me. That was kind of like a practical introduction into, doing sigil magic. Almost immediately after watching that, as I imagine quite a
just fucking do it.
Like, what? I'm doing it. I'm doing it, Grant. And but Illuminatus is up there, and I often think of these things as like they become these like almost like cultural like nodes of novelty. You pick up something like Illuminatus, you're not going to put it down the same person. It's that kind of cultural artifact. It's that kind of thing that's it's going to pierce your consciousness. It's going to pierce how you see the world. Those things are incredible. Like can you talk to Illuminatus a bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree too. It's a strange book in that it has this sort of magical charge to it.
It does, yeah.
It freaked me out when I first read it, reading about the old gods who, because I was just a kid going to Catholic school and getting indoctrinated, and and
I was too when I read it.
Did it freak you out? Because it freaked me out. I was definitely. Because hearing about, and that's the old gods from the H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu mythos and stuff that Wilson and Shea incorporated into their book. And I never heard about that stuff before. And so I was a changed person after reading it. I think because it's able to really provoke and inspire the desire to know more, like what's really going on in this world. And it's written, I think, in such a brilliant way. Of course, some people don't pick up on it, but most people do. And that's, ambiguity in and of itself. It's like, well, all we can say is we know that there's some sort of, things going on behind the scenes, but we can't, if you jump the shark and say that exactly, and then fill in the blank, it's this conspiratorial group, it's that conspiratorial group, you're doing yourself a major disservice. Like that book, along with all of Wilson's works, I think, is, to borrow a phrase from Anton Ali, it's to let people feel at home in the unknown, right? You don't have to, in this very moment, know that it's the Illuminati who peed in your elevator last night, right? but so observe this function of your mind that jumps to these conclusions. I think that's what I picked up from Illuminatus trilogy more than anything else. Like this notion of who are the Illuminati. Um, that's illustrated when the character Hagbar Celine hands people in the book hands people cards that says like, this word is red and it's written in blue and things like that. So that's known as the Stroop test in psychology, and that's done to study what's going on and how people kind of grasp towards a conclusion. And neurologically, we're actually activating a specific area in your brain that like psychologists, neurologists have now found that like is being activated when you are asked to make some sort of decision that requires a certain amount of concentration.
Right.
And moments of sort of like Zen awakening kind of like activate this part of your brain too.
Right.
And I think that Wilson, even though he didn't have the neurological jargon at the time, he knew exactly what he was doing to sort of like
Okay.
push people
Wow.
towards the space of like and that in and of itself is what changes someone, I think. But yeah, people have had some very intense experiences with that book, and I'd say it's still his most infamous book. But I think for me, it just pushed the desire to really just learn more about history than anything else at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fabulous piece, and like the name of your book, like Chapel Perilous, is central to Wilson's philosophy. Like, how do you interpret this idea? Like, and how do you think it manifested in his personal experiences?
Yes. Just so I remember now, it's the anterior cingulate cortex. Cingulate cortex. That's what the part of the brain I'm talking about.
Cool.
But yeah. So sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So the concept of Chapel Perilous is central to his philosophy. Like, how do you interpret this idea, and how did it manifest in his personal experiences? How did it play out in his life? When you saw it in the biography.
For sure. Yeah. So yeah, the term Chapel Perilous it originates from a 15th century poem written by a poet named Thomas de Malory. Um, and it comes from, it's about the Arthurian mythos, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And, in that mythos, the search for the Holy Grail, each knight from the Round Table goes off and searches for the Grail. And in this particular one, the knight, I believe it's Lancelot, has to, comes upon a perilous chapel, upon his path to find the Grail. And this space is like completely demonic. It's possessed, and it's murdering other knights. And his fellow knight is injured, so this knight must enter the perilous chapel to get a piece of cloth from another fallen knight who was killed in there.
Right.
And that cloth will then, once received, will then heal the injured knight outside the chapel. So that's how Thomas Malory wrote about it. It's been written about in other works since then. And, it's kind of like this amazing, the Arthurian mythos is like the original comic books in my mind. It's this great fan fiction, and universes get built or contributed to from various writers across time and space. And it is a location, though, physically within this mythos. And Wilson drew from that as inspiration and applied it to a psychological state.
Right.
He didn't just go right to Thomas de Malory's poem. He himself was sort of influenced by T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland,
Right. Okay.
who,
Yeah.
and there's a section in there where, the protagonist is writing about going through a hallway filled with dead bones, and it's the Chapel Perilous on the way to the Holy Grail. And T.S. Eliot himself was influenced when it came to the Chapel Perilous by this other book by a folklorist named Jesse Weston, a book called From Ritual to Romance that was published in 1920. And that book basically attempts to, contextualize the Arthurian mythos as like it was a fusion between pagan rites and sort of like this rising Christianity,
Right.
but it's a pre-Christian sort of original, story. And but the mythos it's meant to prepare someone for it's a ritual of preparation to then go through another initiation. So it's like a pre-initiation right? Which is kind of funny. And that book influenced T.S. Eliot, and that book also influenced the pagan neo-pagan scene that came about, in the 60s and 70s and whatnot in America and the UK, or should I say UK and America. And I think Bob just drew a lot from that. And also, there's so much there, and so much. Obviously, it's one of the most romantic sort of tales in Western folklore. The Knights of the Round Table, and so Wilson just drew a lot from that. But when he applied it to his what he was going through, it was more a psychological state.
Mm-hmm.
Where events that occur in one's life, one becomes unclear as to is the cause from a supernatural event, or is this just a product of my imagination? And Wilson applied the term Chapel Perilous and entering this sort of strange psychological state to a period of time in his life, probably beginning in roughly 1971 to 77, and he encapsulated it all in his book Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. So that's his description of a time in a place called Chapel Perilous, right? But I extrapolate it and sort of apply it to his whole life, because Chapel Perilous life is a path through Chapel Perilous, and we're seeking a holy grail that hopefully we find at the end of this time. But Chapel Perilous is defined by, I think, my own definition of it is you're in a heightened, more intense space of life. Things are not settled. Things are very tumultuous. It's a cyclone, and you have to find your center in the cyclone.
Yeah, when I was reading through the book and the framing of the Chapel Perilous and kind of looking into the topic after reading the book, like it really struck me as a kind of a very good metaphor for the unexpected, or the random initiation that can happen, like that kind of when your world pushes you in a very difficult and different direction and you become something else. That it's that pressurized environment that is sometimes psychological, sometimes supernatural, and often both of those things at the same time. But I like that it's kind of a mythopoetic term, because there's so many layers to that type of experience. It isn't like a pathological thing. It doesn't fit very well. So I think that a folkloric or term that lends itself or has its origins in poetry and kind of back into great epic myths is appropriate. So
should we talk a little bit more about some of the contemporaries and some of the kind of the Discordian stuff, or do you want to go to Raw's trip to Ireland?
Yeah, let's. I think it might be fitting to speak about Bob in Ireland a little bit, if you're up for it.
Yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously Irish. Just as an aside, before we get into it, the amount of people who I've interviewed, who've had like weird experiences or lean into magic, all the amount, particularly like in your compatriots in America and often further afield, like, oh, yeah, my grandparents were from Ireland, or my dad was from, like, it's quite a noticeable trend, like we're a small nation that produces a vast amount of weirdos, and I say that as a proud weirdo, like but it is there. There's something about Ireland that produces a lot of people who are leaning into this. Like I remember there was some saying of like, shake a tree in Ireland and you'll get like a visionary and a saint will fall out. Like it's there's something embedded in that place. There's a deep mystic past, like, and it's framed in tragedy, to be honest. And I think that does something to the soul. Like, you think about when people talk about like invasive spiritual experiences, they're often the result of a trauma. It's post some event that cracks the kind of the energetics body in some way, and that gives one access to the other in a way that maybe they hadn't courted or indeed wanted. And I think, oh God, geez, I'm going right into it straight away. We haven't even started talking about it, and I'm off. But I think on a cultural level, that's happened to the Irish. That their energetic body is cracked. But that's me waffling. And when we kind of zoom in on when Raw kind of went back to his ancestral homeland.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to touch on a little bit. I'll get to it in my flow here, of what you just said, right? That crack in the Irish mind, perhaps. And it is very interesting. And Wilson, of course, I think observed that and loved that about the Irish, right? Like, and also felt his own intergenerational pain and held that as well. But as far as his path to Ireland, yeah, like as I said, his paternal grandparents were both from Ireland. His grandfather Alex was, I don't know, he might have been raised in Dublin, but he was from Belfast,
right?
And that was his Protestant side, was the Wilsons. And then his grandmother, who married Alex, was from Westmeath, he wrote in one thing, and she was, an Irish Catholic farm girl, right? And they had an interesting marriage, right? Love brought them together. And his father, John, never made it to Ireland, right? Because the travel technology of the day, there were no airplanes, and there was that interesting time of the Irish going to America, and for a number of generations, maybe starting since the 1850s or 40s, that they were not going to return to Ireland, right? And shoot, imagine going to Australia. They're definitely not going to return to Ireland. And so they're within that Irish American sort of identity thing, there is just such like a deep longing still. And so many of the, I mean, everyone in Ireland suffered from the potato famine, but those that did make the trip in those coffin ships, the trauma involved in that was enough horror to fill you,
Oh God, yeah.
nightmares
Yeah.
for generations. And but Wilson, he loved being Irish, I'd say. He, was raised in a Irish Catholic sort of ghetto, as he described it, in the South Shores of Brooklyn, a place called Garrison Beach. And but loving being Irish, but also, like, obviously, like, you have your criticisms of people in general, right? Anyone who's bigoted, that can, stupidity affects everyone. Stupidity is an equal opportunity employer. Just because you're Irish doesn't mean you can't be a
Oh God,
bigot.
no. We're absolute fucking idiots.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so there was that interesting sort of thing that he grew up in Garrison Beach, like this working class Irish American Catholic, and it was kind of like this split between people who would just be rabidly crazy racist, or like people like his dad, who were just like very, relaxed, chill, just trying to like get his family through some hard times. So Wilson was always very aware of this sort of split. Like, his uncle Mick, who was his dad's father, he was a World War I veteran who had gotten seriously injured from mustard gas attack during the war, and he was unable to work after that. And he kind of fell into the trap of following this guy called Father Conklin, this Canadian priest who became a radio televangelist. And he fell for this kind of nativist, anti-Semitic, bigoted, sort of racist kind of perspective. So
Right.
Bob watched as a kid, like, his Uncle Mick trying to convince his dad to join along in this, stupid, like, way of looking at people, and his dad just kind of handling his Uncle Mick because he knew that Uncle Mick was messed up from the war. You know what I
Right.
mean? And Bob really observed that. And I think that he learned something there. This helped him delve into the realm of conspiracy theories many years later,
Right.
without being so overly reactive, and to be able to, engage his heart and have some compassion for people who think some very stupid shit. You know what I mean? And he discovers, Irish American writers like, I think it's Joseph Farrell, who wrote the Studs Lonigan trilogy, who describes the tale of a young Irish American man growing up in the South Side of Chicago. So Wilson saw similarities between this fella Studs and like what he saw where he was, and then through Farrell he learns about James Joyce. And once he learns who James Joyce is, I mean, he's off to the races. He reads, I think, Ulysses at the age of 16, and he never stops reading Joyce for the rest of his life.
Right.
And so many things about Ireland for many years are filtered through this Joycean lens. And of course, Joyce, especially Finnegan's Wake, it's a history book of not just Irish culture, but Scandinavian and Islamic, and it's everything, right? And but Wilson, he does have this longing, I think, that a lot of Irish Americans have had about Ireland, and finally, we're fast forwarding now to 1982. Wilson is 50 years old. After going through this sort of Chapel Perilous period, if you will, as he describes it, he writes about the murder of his daughter Luna in that book Chapel Perilous, and that happened in 1976, and she was 15 years old, and she was brutally murdered in an after-school job that she worked at 10 minutes from their house, and this just tore the family apart. He writes about that a fair amount, but Wilson never really dedicates much ink to the fact that his son Graham had a schizophrenic breakdown shortly after Luna was murdered. And this was the harshest type of breakdown. Graham got the worst of it. Demonic voices telling him to hurt himself, seeing flames. He was in hell, right? And the family was in such shock. They didn't know what was going on at first. So Graham like suffered in silence. And it was, I've really, really like, he's still around, man. I just want to say shout out to Graham, like Graham Wilson, or as he calls himself, Graham Trotsky, I believe. Oh no, Leon Trotsky Jr. He but he yeah, so Graham's illness was sadly really taking a toll on Bob and Arlen, and he'd finally, taking himself out of poverty with the success of his books. Things were going well, but like at home, things were just so hard. He just burnt out. Wilson was just burnt out. On top of that, his old buddy Kerry Thornley, the co-founder of Discordianism, also went crazy and became paranoid schizophrenic. So they say, and he started sending crazy letters or crazy phone calls to Bob. And Bob got scared that Thornley was going to be waiting outside his apartment with a gun and hop out of a bush and just shoot him and Arlen or whatever. He was going through it. And the final straw was his neighbor 3 doors down from him and Arlen was murdered in their apartment building. And that was it. He was like, okay, I need a break. We got to go somewhere. And Ireland was at first going to be just like a little vacation. They're just going to check it out. But it quickly turned into, Wilson and both Bob and Arlen quickly fell in love with the place. I'd say it probably helped that they went to the centennial celebration of Bloomsday in June 1982. So Joyce's 100th birthday. It was a total Joycean, immersive theater. All of Dublin was transformed into this huge immersive theater. And I mean, Bob was in like, heaven, right? And they arrived, they flew to Ireland on June 11th, 1982. They got into a conversation with a nice young man who, over the many hours, Bob and Arlen started thinking that he might be a gun runner for the provisional IRA. They weren't sure. In 1982 was a very, very hot year for what we know as the Troubles, or what's euphemistically called the Troubles. There were Irish Americans who were actually going over to Ireland and to join the IRA as well. There was a person named William Liam Quinn who was arrested. He was from San Francisco. His grandfather was from Ireland. He joined the IRA, was put in an active service unit in London, and got arrested he fled, but he was part of what was known as the Balcom gang.
Right.
So Bob and Arlen, there was reason for them to think like, whoa, what, and when they were walking around Dublin on Bloomsday, as I said, it was like a joyful experience. RTE, Ireland's, most renowned, I suppose, radio station, was playing a 30-hour reading of Ulysses from the RTE players. And, there were actors acting out different episodes of Ulysses on different streets in Dublin all at the same time. So Bob loved this. This was an extremely nonlinear, sort of like, as I said, immersive theater experience. And the day was beautiful. But then at one moment, he caught, a piece of graffiti across the way caught his attention. And it read, H Block is Ireland's Auschwitz. And he didn't really know what that was at the time, but of course, as we know, H Block was the prison as part of Long Kesh, where they kept Irish Republican prisoners like Bobby Sands and 9 other men who died on hunger strike in 1981 into 1982, and so Ireland, it is such an interesting place, like. Dublin is 90 miles from Belfast, right? Like, and you will never get it. One could never feel like there's any war anywhere happening in such a beautiful, idyllic looking place at the time. Dublin, beautiful city. Of course, there was tons of heroin going on in Dublin in the 80s.
Massive junkie.
Like, you didn't see that, but what I mean to say is, like, Wilson was able to read the writing on the wall. He did not stay a tourist and be like, well, I don't want to know anything about that.
Yeah.
His time in Ireland, he went deeper in his knowledge of Joyce. He went deeper in his, knowledge of Irish history, but he also went deeper in understanding, a little bit more of what exactly was going on in the Troubles, and that was a major education for him, I feel like. Um, he learned more about Irish republicanism, and of course, he supported constitutional, non-physical force Irish republicanism, I think, by the end of his time in Ireland. Um, uh, but yeah, so Ireland starts off with a bang, no pun intended. And he, but then once they settle in a little bit, Ireland finds a place in Sandy Cove, um, beautiful little, small little humble
So yeah, it's
spot.
a
But
lovely spot. Yeah.
yeah. But Bob goes through a bout of depression, and for the Ireland chapter, I was able to resource the most continuous correspondence that I accessed. There was about 50 letters over the course of 6 years that Wilson wrote to his friend, this person, Kurt Smith. So that was like Wilson's Ireland years. People don't know a lot about his Ireland years. So I feel like my book really, brings to life what was going on and what he was doing out there. And that's thanks to these letters, and which were procured from a man named Mike Johnson, who Kurt Smith gave the letters to. I just want that to be known. And Wilson gets very depressed at the beginning of '83. He doesn't know why he moved out there. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's thinking like he might have to like get a job. He's very worried about his financial situation. But then along comes Ken Campbell in his Yellow Submarine. Ken Campbell, the British playwright, director, actor, who had staged the Illuminatus trilogy as a 10-hour play in London in 1977, and it of course became a huge cult hit out in the UK. Ken Campbell came to the rescue again 6 years later, and brought Wilson out to London in the spring of '83 and sort of hooked him up with all these different outlets. And then Wilson got a ton of work from that. So he was happy again. He started writing for a magazine called New Age, which allowed him, I guess, to travel to London fairly frequently to interview some luminaries of the time, people like David Bohm, Colin Wilson, Rupert Sheldrake, Travers, the lady who wrote, not Pippi Longstocking, not, name escapes me, a very well-known kind of children's book that became a movie. Wilson interviewed her, Doris Lessing, and this is throughout the '80s. Wilson and then Wilson plugs in to all like the artists and interesting people, all the fun weirdos in Ireland, and then young people find him, like this group called the Golden Horde. And they were sort of like a psychedelic punk band of the early '80s.
Yeah,
And
I know them.
Oh, you do?
Oh, well, a mate of mine who I went to university with, she was a mature student, but she used to be one of the backing singers in the Golden Horde.
Oh,
But like
shoot.
Simon Carmody and those guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool, man.
Mm.
Yeah. Simon and Des O'Brien, they are huge fans of Wilson's, and they see a flyer that Bob was going to be speaking. This is in, I believe, late 1984 around. That Bob was going to be speaking at, I think, Trinity University, like the Dublin sci-fi, community, whatever. And they were like, "What the fuck? Like, what is this guy doing in Ireland? Like, why is he here?" So they went to go and see him talk, and they're like, "Why is there hardly anybody here? Like, how come this room isn't packed out for this guy?" And they were big fans, and they approached Bob after his lecture, and they told him who they were. And of course, they were a psychedelic punk band, and they just said off the top of their head, like, "Hey, if you ever want to get on a record, let's make something happen. And Bob was like, yeah, sure, I love it, I love to do that. And they cut a record together, the Golden Horde and Robert Anton Wilson. It was called the Chocolate Biscuit Conspiracy, and it charted the highest it got in the charts, the UK charts in the summer of 1986. It charted at number 23. So that was pretty fitting for them.
Nice.
And that's a fun record to listen to as well. You can hear it on YouTube. Bob is on 2 tracks of this EP, and he's kind of like, freestyling, sort of improvisational, surrealistic rhymes. It's pretty cool.
In terms of in terms of kind of like wrapping up, kind of about your work, what would you think of? Would Raw be pleased with your book?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that, I dedicated my life to it for a number of years. It took about 8 years to write. And then the last 5 years, I mean, this is maybe another topic for another episode. Like, I was jettisoned into Chapel Perilous like never before during the course of writing this book. I moved around. I mean, I thought Bob moved around a lot. I mean, I was houseless for 3 years. Me and my girlfriend, we were living in one Airbnb after another, like we were, rebels on the run or something like that. But it was just because of the housing apartheid that currently exists in America. It was insane, to get into an apartment. So my life was thrown up in disarray, and the book was my constant. And so I poured absolutely all my energy into the book. I do other artistic things, and all that went to the side. I completely dedicated everything I possibly could to this book, and I think that's what was necessary to write a book about Robert Anton Wilson. And I think he would raise a glass to me for this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I can only echo that. Like, it's demonstrably evident reading the book how much research and how much work and how considered it is. It really is a fantastic piece of work. So,
Thank you, Derek.
Kudos to you. It was an excellent piece of writing, and voluminous. It was extraordinary detail, and there's a lovely balance of the traditional chronological biography, and then kind of analytical, part essays to kind of frame thinking and changes in thinking and influences throughout. So I really enjoyed it. Excellent read, and for such a significant cultural figure, very apt to get such a great work dedicated to him. So congratulations, fabulous book.
Here's Dad. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that.
And for people who want to know a bit more about you or pick up a copy of Chapel Perilous, where's the best place for them to do so?
Best place right now, head to my website, chapelperilous.us. From there, you can go to the links to, purchase the book, whether it's on Amazon. I recommend Lulu. I think Lulu, I like their company better. It's a B Corp. Workers get paid better. The book print is better than the Amazon version. But the book itself is great. You'll love it. And I recommend people maybe check out my Substack, GabrielPatrickKennedy.substack, and maybe my Medium page, Gabriel Kennedy Medium. Right. And that's about it. Yeah. Check out chapelperilous.us to purchase the book.
Brilliant. But do ping those links over to me, and I'll pop them in the show notes. And thanks for coming on Spirit Box, Gabriel. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, Dara. Thank you for having me, man.
Awesome. Wonderful stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm going to have Gabriel back on the show in a couple of months' time. We're look at things from a folkloric perspective, so that's something to look forward to. It's an extraordinary book he's created here. Super detailed. So much research went into it. It really is an excellent biography for a significant figure in our
area of interest, a hugely influential figure. So, yeah, I do recommend it. Great book. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm Dara Mason. You may listen to Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.